What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to this episode of Split Screen D&D, the place where we're attacking all things Dungeons & Dragons from both sides of the screen. My name's Tom Quinn, resident Dungeon Master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth. So, Tom, I'm thinking, when you're sitting at a table, there's a lot of things being said. And it is often hard as a player character to be like, hey, what do I know as a PC, as a person who exists in this reality, and what does my character who lives in Faerun, what do they know in their reality? And I feel like that is often a blurred line and has gotten people in trouble and has broke immersion. There's a lot of really bad negative things that not having that clear separation that can happen. So I think that'd just be a fun little thing to talk about today.
Yep, 100%. I have not been so hyped for a subject in a long time. Like this subject, when you brought it up, I was like, oh, man.
That surprised me, too.
I can't believe we haven't hit this one sooner. But before we dive into that,
yes,
all you beautiful people at home, we love the support. We've hugely appreciated all your engagement in the comments. So keep doing what it is you're doing, smashing that like, smashing that little bell, dropping those comments, hitting that subscribe, and a new one on the list, because there's always a little bit more on the list. You know someone who might be enjoying these videos, tap that share and send it on over their way. We'd hugely appreciate that support. If you guys want to help us make a bunch more content like this and everything else we're doing here at Modern Myth, jump on over to patreon.com/modmyth. But without further ado, let's get into player versus character knowledge. I'm so stoked for this one because I think I'm actually surprised at... I consume a fair bit of D&D YouTube, and I'm actually surprised that I don't see this topic more.
Maybe it's not an issue, but I don't know. So what interests me is because I brought this up, like, oh, this is going to be a super player character sided conversation, but it sounds like you've got a lot to say from the DM side too.
I think so.
I'm really curious about that. So let's get the obvious stuff out of the way. I think when people
check some boxes.
Yeah. When people think, hey, player character knowledge versus
player knowledge versus character knowledge.
Thank you, God.
You're good.
Man, it's gonna be another one. I think every episode is like I have at least 5,000 brain farts. But
that's how we do.
So the obvious one is you have that player who decided to memorize the monster manual and all the stat blocks, and they decide to use that information to try to win D&D.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty universally acknowledged as don't do that, please.
Yeah, I think it's just bad form, and I think it's the fastest thing that's going to make your DM go, well, I guess I'm not using any of those anymore.
Right.
And if they have a brain cell, they're going to look at Todd, who always memorizes stat blocks, and go, all right, Todd. And you're going to end up getting...
John Bob.
You're going to end up... No, John Bob's a saint.
Oh, that's right. John Bob's a good one. We haven't talked about John Bob in a hot minute.
He hasn't been around. No, I think that's a no-brainer. And this really is an outside of the game. I mean, it obviously applies in the game. Like,
right.
There's nothing more frustrating as a DM than... pulling out the minis and kind of describing the scene as combat's unfolding, and someone's all like, "Oh, that's a CR9."
Whatever. This many hit points.
Yeah, and you're just going like, dude, that is the fastest way to break immersion. Now, I will also say, if you're running like a meat grinder style, where like. You're not really playing for the sake of immersion. You're playing for slay those monsters, collect that loot,
try to stay alive.
Yeah, then it could actually be like I could actually see an entire game that kind of functions in a space where it's totally reasonable. Like it's almost that like the DM is reaching as deep as he can into all these supplemental monsters and content to really kind of challenge that aspect of his play group. But for most 5th edition tables, I think really for most tables, period, they're aiming for a semblance of immersion, and any of that kind of game speak jargon, it's it's bad form, and it really just doesn't read good at the table.
Yeah,
I'll say as a DM, I don't think I have ever had the displeasure of dealing with it.
Yeah,
but it would be something that would grate on me rapidly. And I mean that's part of the reason, even for no one at our table memorizing stat blocks or anything like that. But there are times that I just want to put something on the table that no one can have any idea what it is because it didn't come from it's it's not rooted in that. So
Plus, you know, like I'm thinking, I like to play a lot of the video games like Monster Hunter World and Dark Souls, and part of the joy of fighting the boss is learning the things and adapting to it in real time.
right.
Well, in Demon Souls, you adapt by dying 8 million times, but you know that idea, and I think that's really that you lose a lot of enjoyment if you just like why you're just trying to win D&D. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and I think you also brushed up against the fact that you may be robbing the other players at the table.
Oh, 100%.
You know, they don't want to know that.
Right.
Like they maybe didn't have any idea like what this thing is or what it's about, or you know, and part of maybe their enjoyment. Obviously, their chances of survival go up by hearing that, but again, it's at what cost?
Yeah, exactly. You know, but I do think there's like room for just common sense. You know,
100%.
Like, don't just be like, well, my character is, you know, they're running up against a demon. Well, if you have Radiant, you should probably use like, you know, Radiant stuff. But yeah,
something I'll say is that it brings up an interesting question. We talked about how blurred this line can be. Is until your character has come up against the demon. Could they possibly know? Is that how common knowledge is?
That's a good question.
You know what I mean?
I would say it's fairly common.
I think it's so common knowledge amongst players. I mean, kind of in the same way that, and I think it's probably setting dependent. I mean, you know, like if there's never been a demon sighting, you know, in the entirety of this little world you have.
Okay.
And
even then, though.
But I think that might be a deal where if I am intent on breaking a trope, or I should say, sidestepping a trope, I might just go a different direction with it. I might go like, oh well, here's some other kind of fiend who who's going to kind of subvert their expectations.
Right, which is cool.
You know, but no, absolutely. I don't think you know, the metagaming or that kind of stuff really should ever be conflated with just using common sense as your character.
Yeah, and then I don't know. Again, I want to focus. I'm really curious where we're going to go, so I don't want to spend too much time. But I was just thinking, like, hey, if your character is fluent in Draconic, then you might know more about kobolds, because obviously your character is more steeped in that culture. Like, hey, kobolds are great at setting traps. Like, okay, because you speak Draconic, you probably are more familiar. Versus someone from the Feywild, you know, they're probably not going to know anything.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I think that all tethers into, and I think that's actually a really good example of utilizing reasonable character knowledge, even if it's not something that's been explicit, like, you know, oh, you were raised by kobolds, or you know, whatever it is.
You know, every backstory in D&D raised by kobolds. That would actually be
a surprisingly large number.
I know
of them,
that'd be a really interesting trope, like, you know, a human raised by kobolds. That sounds fun.
I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see it.
No, I'm not playing that character.
But no, I think looking at something that makes sense for your character, you know, I mean, though that's kind of the ongoing negotiation, I think, between players and the DM. And if you go like, you know, hey, seeing as I learned Draconic from a kobold in whatever the sewers in the city I grew up in, like, would I know more about? And it's like, fuck yeah, you would. Like, of course you would.
Right.
You know, I don't think that necessarily defies player knowledge, but it really is. It's not something I really thought about until we just started talking about it. Is you can't help the more time you spend adjacent to Dungeons and Dragons, there's just
you're
things
pick stuff.
As players you just come to know to be true. I mean, I think like sneaky, trappy kobolds is a great example of that. You know, and in reality, if you come from a part of the world where there are none, realistically, your character probably doesn't know any of that. But that's a really difficult when something's so common knowledge.
Well, and that would be a question for the DM, like, hey, does my character know?
And I think that's a really solid way of approaching that. Is if you're on the fence, to just phrase it in question form, like, you know, what would I know about kobolds? You know, you come across an encampment.
There you go.
And I think that's a moment for you and the DM to go, oh well, because of XYZ, and because it's probably not unreasonable that that you would know that. So no, I think that's solid.
And one other thought, that I was thinking, I thought was interesting, because I'm a min-maxer and I like optimizing my choices. What do you think about this idea? And this might be more definitely geared towards the 5e crowd, that you should make decisions based on what you think your character would do versus what you know would be optimally, because if you're traveling with the party, you know who's best at what. You know who the athletic strong guy is. You know
Right.
who the sneaky.
Absolutely.
So would like I came up with an example earlier, but I'll throw out a different one. Let's say your son has been kidnapped. You are the paladin, right? Would you still be the one to sneak in because you are like, no, I'm going to be the one to go and sneak in and find my son versus the rogue who makes more sense?
Right.
Which
right.
one would make more sense?
Well, I think, I mean, to some extent, I think if what the paladin would know that the rogue might be a better. So that's
true.
That's certainly character knowledge, and I think it's kind of skirting. I think it's kind of skirting the. I guess what I would. I think it's skirting more into the RP space than player versus character knowledge.
Yeah.
But let's say that's how these characters meet. That might be a different way of thinking about it. Is you literally are in pursuit of this person who has taken your son, your daughter, whoever, someone you care about, captive, and that's how you come to meet this rogue. You don't know anything. Your character doesn't know anything about them.
Yeah.
You as a player might know that they're a rogue.
Yeah.
From like, hey, I've seen their character sheet. I know what they're. Well, to show up and be like, well, are you going to sneak in? Will you pick the lock? Will you do,
Right.
like that's maybe a different space.
Gotcha.
I actually really like your earlier example that you gave was like, if you had, your child is trapped beneath some rubble or, whatever, to turn to the barbarian or the fighter or, to me I certainly think from a role play standpoint, there are times in which you should defy both your player and your character knowledge just because it's what your character,
right.
Like you might be a 6th strength wizard,
Right.
but you love that person and you're desperately trying to, it doesn't stop you from turning back and being like, fucking help me.
Right.
So yeah, I think, I don't know how much I would land that in that space,
Okay.
but certainly, like I said, if the threshold that you're crossing is that of a skill or ability that someone else at the table has that your player has never seen, someone leveled up and they're excited and maybe outside a game, to ask them to use that ability in game is, I would say, a pretty blatant violation of that threshold or that barrier.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure. So okay, I was kind of curious about your thoughts about this, and another again. Probably pretty obvious, but this is where it gets hard. So we're all sitting at a table, and you as a DM are sharing kind of private information with a character, but we're all privy to it, and I think it is. I want to know. I was trying to figure out why it's so damaging that if you, as the person who shouldn't know anything about it, uses that information.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out, like, why is that so negative? Like, why is that?
Well, it's going to be a very roundabout way, I think, of answering that question. So maybe we just answer that question, I think, and then, but like what you're hitting on right now is quite literally the jumping off point for.
Sweet. Let's get after it. Yeah,
the DM side. But I mean, I think we can. I mean, I think a big part of that is, I think, if you were privy to that information, like outright privy to that information, the first question is what was the DM's motivation in not asking you to leave? If I'm talking with another player, and that's not to say, like, it could be the wrong call, 100%. Like you being there to be privy to, or someone being privy to a private exchange for you, I absolutely think. I think when let's call it we'll call it private information or side information is entering the space. There's a number of ways that I think DMs tend to handle it. Like, say you asked to make an insight check.
Yeah.
I could hand you a note with the response. I could step out of my seat and whisper the response to you. I could just make it public information and just ask everyone to be adults and know that you're the only one who knows that. I could ask everyone else to leave. And I think the what that information is should be a major consideration in how you're disseminating that as a DM.
Right.
And that's, like I said, that's not to say that's always an easy decision to make, and it's not always, I mean, it can absolutely, after the fact, have been the wrong decision, especially in a situation like you described.
Yeah.
Where another player, I think a lot of that comes down to your table dynamic, but I do think, I think of all of those categories, kind of the big juxtaposition is delivering information publicly.
Yes.
That is in fact private. And you're basically saying, I'm providing you guys with player information that your characters are not privy to.
Right.
And what you're effectively doing is offloading that responsibility onto your players. Because alternatively, I could say, can you guys please step away? I need to have this exchange. One, that can have its own consequences to doing that. Like say you're running this kind of big espionage sequence and everybody's making it, and like consistently you're going like, hey, would you guys mind?
Pacing goes right out the window.
Right. But I absolutely think, there are 100% times where it's warranted to not have the rest of the players there. So in those two big, I would make an argument that generally speaking, or I'll just say generally speaking, I lean in the direction of more information is better. I think that kind of the dichotomy is we can either deliver information in a simulationist fashion where it makes no sense for anyone to have more information than their character reasonably would have. Okay. In which case, anytime an aside is occurring, I would do what I can in my power to ensure that information is being delivered privately.
Yes.
Like truly privately. And I'm no longer having to ask, and they're no longer burdened with having to stay on the right side of the character and player knowledge. So that's a huge benefit.
Yeah.
You're not offloading that weight onto your players. And but I absolutely think, and I think that in a, again, kind of a more simulationist game, but even in a what I'm going to call a kind of a story forward or narrative forward experience that 5th edition kind of is tailored toward delivering, some of the definitive moments where I know I would want to deliver information in that way is if that information that's being delivered, if the decisions that might be made with that information could be heavily contrasting with those of your party. Yeah. And an example, well, actually, I don't want to pull one from the Rovers because that's going to be like that'll be a bit of a spoiler out. But a good example might be, well, we just talked about this kidnapping. You're this paladin.
Yeah. Love it. Let's do it.
Cool. Let's say that you just go, there's no time. Like if something happens to my son, I won't forgive myself. I won't forgive, and just boom, just bust that door and charges in, maybe the rest of the party, a skirmish breaks out and the party goes like, go get your kid. Like we got this, know, you get to that room and this villain, undoubtedly a villain, like it's just too good a position to be in. Yeah. It's gotta be someone you've known. It's gotta be someone, but he's got the blade to your son's throat and basically says, this is what you're going to do. And that thing is going to dismantle the work that you guys have been doing for the last 3 levels.
God, that's good. I'd hate that being in that position.
Quite clearly, that does not work if I deliver that to you with the rest of the party there.
Yes.
It mechanically does not work. It doesn't allow you to even make a decision. You know that if, as you're moving and making those decisions, the rest of the party, that's too big a burden to ask them to just pretend that you're not fucking them for the next level and a half. You know what I mean? Like, so that's a good example of, but I think those are pretty few and far between. There are many, many moments that are very clearly private that I don't think hinge with that same weight. And I think there's a lot of value in having players who aren't present be able to experience those moments as well.
Yeah. That's, gosh. So I was like, which one do I prefer? Do I like the private or the public?
Well, that's a big question I had going into this. What are your thoughts on what I just broke down?
Yeah.
And can you recall a time, or can you just ballpark a type of information where you're like, I don't want to be at the table for that. Like, it might be innocuous, but I would prefer that you ask me to leave, because it's just not, it's those are decisions I think that, and this is why I said, like, I don't see people talking about this a lot.
Yeah.
Those are calls that it's not often the fingers getting pointed at, like, take any live play or and go like,
Right.
I wonder why he chose to deliver that in private, but that in public. Like, what was the threshold that?
Well, and I'm sure that's subjective, and you having to know who your players are at their maturity level. Not to be, don't be anything negative about that, but if you have that person who just cannot separate player character and player knowledge and character, oh God,
Get it?
I know, right? So that could definitely influence it.
Right.
When I think of like things that are public private, I don't know what else to call public private.
Yeah.
But it's stuff that is like you read a note from the king and you express what is in the note. It's kind of like they probably would pass. It's not like super like something out of left field is in that note. It's something that's very straightforward, that makes a lot of sense. And what I like about it is in game they will reiterate what they read in the note. But how to put this? We as player characters don't have the gift of storytelling that most DMs have, or the notes right in front of them. So the odds of them forgetting or not explaining it as well, what is happening is the DM explains it first really well, and then we get a summary from a player. So we've heard it twice now, and now we really have the knowledge pretty well ingrained.
I had never considered the reiteration factor. And I could see how that could be. Well, again, I could see both sides of that coin. Obviously, in terms of a retention and it solidifying it as important information from a pacing standpoint, obviously.
Yeah.
But I've never noticed it being a huge detriment. And like I said, I really like seeing the way in which players choose to disseminate information. And like I said, especially when it's like, it wouldn't have to be a betrayal necessarily, but let's say we're talking about that same note. Well, if that note is information that's really, really valuable to another player, I might, and I don't have to do an aside or anything like that. I might just go in between sessions, just go, hey, this note was passed to you by so-and-so. And then they can read it, because it also doesn't have the same meaning for, let's say it's a note that was sent to Katerina that outlines, well, we're just going to keep running with this.
Rescuing
rescuing that outlines that an obituary entry for someone sharing your son's name has made itself present in the town that you're from.
Yeah.
I think it's way better in terms of intra-party role play, having just her deliver that and however she feels, because me delivering that information publicly is I'm a neutral party. I should, and if I'm not wearing an NPC, so I like I said, I love seeing how players disseminate information.
Yeah.
And there can be some really powerful RP moments when a player is privy to something that they know is important to another player. And those, I think, end up being the times where I think it's important to exercise some discretion.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what the movie is. There's a movie where they're planning an ambush, and they're like, how many enemies? Oh, it's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Kevin Costner in the greatest English accent ever. But they're setting up an ambush, and they're like, how many people do you see? It's like 7. It's like, how many people? 5. Can't count anyway. It's kind of a thing. So he's changing the, like, if we were playing that at a table, everyone would have known that it was 7, not 5. But it creates a humor. Or withholding information, it can be like, you have to rescue your son, and there's heavily guarded. You might be like, just holding that back because you want to make sure that and as a player character, I'd be like, you know what, that's fine. Hold that back. I don't care. I still want to help you. I don't care how many guards there are, and I'll be surprised when it happens. Not a big deal.
Right.
So yeah, I don't see any problems with that.
Yeah, and I do think there's something of a tightrope. I would just say that when, as DMs, when we're thinking about the way in which we're disseminating information that isn't just entirely if an NPC walks up and goes like, "Oh, hi guys, I just want to let you know that," you know,
No, you don't need to have an aside over that one.
yeah, but if if you guys are having a drink at the bar and kind of a shady stranger elbows up next to Katarina and starts having a whispered conversation, there's a few thoughts that start going through my head. One, is the table knowing this information going to be somehow detrimental to Katarina's ability to do something with this information? Is this information that might guide her to act in a way that they may disapprove of, or that would be one half of it. The other half is and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
In thinking about this topic, obviously, I think when we think about role play, that is to be wearing your character.
Yep.
You and your character are one thing, and it's indistinguishable. That's that. No,
I know it's supposed to be like I'm not that good.
But the thing is I think to say it's supposed to be is maybe a false idol. I mean, obviously, there's varying grades of.
Yeah.
I'm going to propose that no matter how good you are at RP and at putting on your character, you as a player, when you extrapolate the two, however close they are in unison, the player is always, to some extent, an audience member to their character. The players at the table are all audience members, including the DM is an audience member as well, of the stories that are unfolding at the table. And something you can't do in Dungeons and Dragons that in so many, maybe any other medium, in a purely first-person experience, you don't have the opportunity to build dramatic irony. You cannot have a cutaway to the rival, the antagonist, that bad guy, only as an audience to see that, oh shit, he's actually working towards the same means. Like they're he's not the villain we've thought he was.
Right.
And the tension that grows with the audience in knowing this when the protagonists do not, that dramatic irony, I think there's absolutely room, and this is why I say that dissemination of information publicly, there are opportunities to build that.
I like that.
That irony with the players, that dramatic irony with the players, because they're appreciating something that's unfolding. Now that's a balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because and generally I would say, if the initial example, if no matter how dramatic that irony would be in the other players knowing that you've been asked to betray them by the man who's got a blade, there's no way it's going to carry the same weight of you being free to use that information to make a decision and now to decide, is my son more important than my party or our goals or what have you. But I think that if you're not being conscious as a DM about that dissemination, there's going to be missed opportunities for both.
Well, so as I hit on something really interesting that I didn't think about, that the private public, the public private, is we get to share that, and that is kind of what D&D, at least 5e, is really heavy on, is that shared storytelling experience. So, in a way, if you did all private, you would take away from that, but switching a little bit more to the private, as you were doing, like, if you're to say, hey, what do I prefer? Like, what's special to me? Private, for sure, no doubt, 100%.
Right.
And the reason is one, usually just because of how you run things, when I get said, hey, everyone else leave the room, Josh, stay behind, I know I'm in for some good shit. Like, that's the good stuff right there. So And that's automatically like I'm already excited. And it gives me this is, I don't know if this is quite the right word, but it gives me some power. I
Yeah.
now decide how the rest of the table sees what happened. They could come back and I'll be like, nothing happened.
Right.
I made that choice. I have that power over the story. It could be I share 20%, 40, 50. I decide the dissemination of information,
Right.
which is so cool. I
Right.
love that.
Yeah, and I don't think that should be understated. You know, from a DM, exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
And I think probably part of the reason that you go, ooh, like everyone's being asked to leave, I'm hyped, is because we don't do it that often. Now, if I
Was my
did it
second
all
point,
the
yeah.
time, it might just be more of the
Yes.
same.
That was about to make that exact same thing.
And
Yep.
and yeah, I think I mean, and I really do think that when the table's asked to step away, that often it's not dissimilar from when we were talking about the dice roll. Is dice rolls should be when something meaningful needs adjudicating.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a similar deal, and that's I would also just throw out there, we talked about in that same episode about dead rolls and just asking you to roll for no reason.
Yes.
There may be times if it's clear your players are getting a little too like, ooh, we're being asked to step away. Okay, well, maybe introduce a few more asides just to keep things a little lighter. But I think your reaction just now highlights the importance of not just going, well, we're all adults and we'll all pretend we don't know things.
Right.
There is absolutely information that should not betray the player character knowledge barrier.
Well, and it's because it's cool if you're the guy who gets to stay, right? Because you get the special cookie. But it's also cool for the guys who get to leave because now there's tension. When you're down here talking, what do you think we're talking about when we're away? We're not talking about the weather. We're like, what do you think he's talking about? What do you think they're going to be saying? Right. So it builds tension. It builds wonder. It builds immersion. Like all the things that you want to be happening, it's building it. But I don't know if, like, because you mentioned, like, oh, maybe just throw out some, like, oh, I'm going to pull this person aside. I don't know if I like that. That's oversaturating.
Well, like I said, I don't execute that, but just in the spirit of, if your players are getting those googly eyes because they know it's too much of a tell, like, hey, something massive just happened, and now I'm going to come back and just eyeball my friend until they say something about it, when in fact, again, they in that moment are betraying the character player knowledge barrier. Like they don't know that you just had, well, I should say, depending on the circumstances, maybe they do know. Maybe you just had an aside with the king and the door's shut and they went like,
dude, what'd you talk about with the king? Yeah.
Then it's totally reasonable for them to be like, what'd you talk about with the king? And you just go like, oh, actually, he's a big fan of jousting. So we were just talking about some of those earlier matches. So, but so
that's also important. Like if it is as a player character, if the DM is like, hey, everyone leave, and your character has no reason to suspect anything, don't come back to the table being like, okay, what happened?
Right.
No, let that player character, your fellow player just got a little bit of a gift. Let them enjoy the gift.
Right. Yeah, and I think let them disseminate that information the way that they're going to want to process that, and then they need to push that information out through RP.
Yes.
In whatever fashion that is. And like I said, that is one of the most enjoyable parts about hearing an exchange that you've had translated out. Well, I mean, not just for like what was lost in translation, whether it be intentional or not intentional. Like, it's it's not always the same thing, and you go and it's cool to be able to see how even those little nuances have some impact. So, just a real quick thought. What was your, or I should say, a question? This is just a follow up, but I don't think we hit on it. Was what is your thought with regard to the concept of players serving as both their characters and audiences of those characters and audiences of the entire game? Kind of what I was talking about with dramatic irony, that, in general, that would be an actual audience, like Shakespearean play is unfolding and something, an aside scene plays out here where, a great example is the audience knows in Romeo and Juliet, the audience knows at the end that it's the moment of suicide that is occurring. You know, they're watching the scene play out, and part of the reason that that is a potent scene is because they know what the characters do not. And that can be such a powerful tool.
Absolutely.
And this, again, I'm specifically leaning in the direction of, again, those story forward, narrative forward games.
I think most of this conversation is 5e.
I think, like I said, I think
that might be wrong. Don't kill me. So I'm gonna get a comment like, fuck you, dude.
No. I mean, I'll be curious to hear, and I actually think it's as much table to table as anything.
That's very fair.
Because I think, kind of like what I was talking about, I think this process starts with the DM generally, and so how they handle that. But real quick, because I've one other big point that I want to touch on that pivots us a little bit. But what are your thoughts on that framing of the table, that players are their characters, and obviously the goal is to be as in that skin as possible. But even at the best of times, there's still some extrapolation.
See, okay, so maybe this is because I'm not the best role player. I see my character more as a character in a book, and like you're saying, I'm the reader. I'm the co-author of this book. I don't see myself as Kel. I see myself as me playing Kel.
Gotcha.
So I want to see those things. I want to see those. So I have zero problem. I would lean into that.
Gotcha. Okay. And I guess, maybe I overstepped in saying that is. I think
it just depends on the player.
I think that notion of like being so thoroughly inside your character is some idol up there.
Yeah.
That like some people look up to, some people are desperately reaching to, and some people just go like, yeah, look, I love what I'm doing here. But I think in the framing that you just laid out, it's probably even more true that like if you are the co-author, that kind of in the same way that a DM is helping to author but simultaneously reading the story, that we are all audience members of the events that are playing out, and for that reason, like I said, anyone who is running games or anyone who is a player, which is going to pivot me into my next point, be thinking about the fact that you have an audience. I mean, you have a group of people who have gotten together, and there's a reason that dramatic irony is such a potent tool throughout literature. And again, I mean, the cutaway in film is effectively the tool by which we give the audience information.
Yes.
That if it was a first-person story, how could we ever know anything other than what the character knows?
Or the greatest device in narration, the exposition. Just hours and hours of exposition is the greatest thing you can do in filmmaking.
I mean, I think if you have not started any film with a solid 15-minute block of like, I'm going to say like a, I don't know, 12-year-old girl just reading from a sheet of paper.
I hate this because like one of my favorite movies, Dune, from 1987 or whatever.
I was doing my best to channel
I know, but frick, man, I don't care. I still love that film. But the whole beginning is like, it even fades away and it comes back like, oh, by the way, I forgot more exposition. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think Dune actually is an awesome movie.
Yeah.
But that is a great representation of maybe not the best decision making from a filmmaking or really any narrative.
The
last point that I want to hit on, and the reason I bring up DMs and players is because actually I'm gonna set a scene. Sitting around the fire.
I see it now.
It's
You're magical at this.
You've likely never been in this situation or even heard of a situation like this
in D&D or being around.
Never
once.
Never. I'm that original. No, but and your character decides to turn in for the night.
Okay. Oh, okay.
The other characters, maybe another character does, maybe another. Finally, there's just two characters left sitting around, and they have an exchange. Now, this is now stepping entirely away from, because I've been talking to this point about the DM thinking about how they want to disseminate information.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I've never seen a player ask the rest of the table to leave.
now you are going to moving forward. But go ahead.
Well, I'm not suggesting that
No.
should be a thing, but it is another perfect example, and I think whether it's falls under the category of dramatic irony or not, though, that's one of the examples of precisely why information shouldn't purely be simulationist, because as a player who has decided they're turning in for the night, you want to catch that long rest, just being at the table privy to a really meaningful exchange. And again, if it's two characters just kind of, allowing some of who they are to bleed out onto the page, that can often be a really meaningful exchange. And I can't really think of a reason why it's detrimental for the rest of the table to understand more about their companions.
Yes.
Now, like you said, if all of a sudden the next day you wake up and you're like, hey,
I happen to I happen to overhear. No, you made the choice to be asleep.
Right.
Accept that choice. Yeah.
But I think that that's a good example of where, and this really blurs the lines. Let's say there's a character in the party that you are not particularly fond of.
Todd. Fuck Todd.
God, that guy's such a dick.
Why can't they all be John Bobs?
Well, they can't all be, or none of them would be. That's
true.
But a character you really don't care for.
Okay.
Or just you guys haven't really jived.
Oil and water. Yep.
And while you're asleep, you watch an interaction play out that turns your perception of that character.
Well, you can't.
On the air. Now, but the interesting thing is I actually think it's one of the few places. Now, I'm not saying that because I don't think you have a choice at this point. When you as a player have witnessed this, now you might still be like, nah, fuck you. The very first day that we met, you tried to steal something from me. Like, stay away from me, you little creep. But I think there's a huge amount about that characters learn about each other. Players learn about each other's characters in moments that they technically aren't privy to.
Right.
There's a number of games where I know for a fact this is a commonplace. It's commonplace. I think it has been in our game.
Yes.
That's one of those areas where if your opinion potentially begins to shift about a character, I am not suggesting that you act as though you know that your character doesn't know that information, but I think you have a hard time as a player not allowing your character to give them some slack.
Yeah.
If you're coming to, it's a very, very gray area.
It is.
But it's interesting because as a player, I'm just curious, do you just pick your battles? Like if you wanted to have an aside, do you just go, this is something I'm totally okay with being public? Because again, with you not having the option of going, hey, get out of here. I don't want you to hear this.
Right.
That means that any aside you initiate has to be public. I mean, I'd love to hear in the comments. Have you ever had a player ask the rest of the party to leave? Now, clearly, you could have a conversation outside of the game.
Yeah, I know Amanda does that with the writing notes, I think.
Well, definitely she'll send correspondence in between sessions, mostly just to not take up session time,
which
is
actually really great idea.
But I was just curious. I mean, I don't know how much you've thought about like when, where, and why you would initiate one of those asides, but I know you've been a party to them. Like I think in the Shattered Canyon, you and Katarina stepped off the ship to kind of have this exchange. I mean, you kind of, as a player, that's just what you do? You just have that exchange.
Yeah.
And you trust that the rest of the players are going to respect that they weren't privy to that. I hadn't even really given this that much thought because from the DM perspective, I get the choice.
Yes.
But it's interesting to not have that choice.
So I think of like, what is the goal of what we're doing when we're sitting down at the table? Is to tell interesting stories.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're having a side with someone, hopefully that's an interesting part of the story.
Right. It's progressing something.
So if you're denying other people from hearing that, you're denying them. Now, I'm not saying there might not be times, right? I'm not saying that, but if you're just having like I want to open up about my childhood, that kind of stuff, and that's really interesting, and you get to learn more about the character, you're denying the other people at the table that joint storytelling experience.
Right.
And I don't like that as much. Now at our table, I feel like we're very respectful of it, and we eat that stuff up, man.
Right.
Like
I think most players tend to.
Right.
I mean, for the same reason that it's not built into the rule system that a player can, raise the shillelagh and go, I'm using my once weekly
private
banish other players.
Right. Turn players.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's kind of built into the narrative aspect of the game an expectation that things that players want to do, even when private, are public domain.
Yeah.
And subsequently other players need to be respectful.
Yeah,
of
and
that.
that's the thing, is you need to be respectful of it.
Right.
And again, you brought up an interesting point. Like, hey, let's say we have an oil and water players, or characters, let's say characters, play oil and water characters, and then they turn in, and then another player turns one of them aside, and you get to hear like, hey, this is why this guy's such a dick. Well, even if you don't act on that knowledge, you kind of brought this up, and I think that's really great, is oftentimes player characters, like, if I don't like a character, that might bleed like, I just don't like that character. Like, me as a player, I don't like that character. It has nothing to do with I just think it's a dick, and fuck that guy. But, like, it's like if you meet that guy who's a huge asshole, but then you learn, oh, his dad beat him when he was a kid. I mean, okay, now...
Isn't there a Key and Peele? It's like I kept trying to think of the one.
Oh, there's the one where he's the brutally honest bully. It's
that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
I'm gonna internalize this and come back tomorrow and beat you. Yeah, that one is hilarious.
That's the one I was thinking.
One of my favorite Key and Peele skits. But that idea, like, it even subconsciously, it opens you up to the idea that this person is different.
That's kind of my point. The subconscious aspect.
Yeah.
And it's subconscious. I don't know that you can't hold someone, again, they're trying to do what they can to keep those two things separate. But I think it's actually one of the boons of being able to progress relationships at the table.
Yes.
Even when you're not privy to that information that might be helping to progress that relationship.
You do need
and that can work the other way, too.
It can. Yeah. But I think it really does. You need a mature, maybe I'm being like, you have to have a mature table.
I think I do. I think there's a level of respect and maturity that really ties into this topic. And it's again, it can be a big time downer if there's someone who just won't lend people that respect of keeping those barriers in check. So,
boundaries. Yeah, you gotta have people. Yeah,
gotta have boundaries. Gotta do
boundaries. I don't know. I
don't think we do. You got any? You got a final wrap up?
No. As far as a player character, I don't know. I think we covered it all pretty well. I'd like to sum it all up. It's going to take like 5 minutes, but this was interesting. I like how much.
I'm surprised that we haven't tackled this topic before, because as soon as you brought it up, I went like, holy crap,
And this is kind of a shot in the dark, honestly. I was like, hey, maybe we haven't talked about this. Maybe we should.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you brought it up, and this will be a super quick synopsis. It's not so much a synopsis. It's more of this is something that I think we or at least I have harped on the channel in terms of the DM space. Is so many of these episodes that we're talking about, I try to think about how that topic is executed through a tool or as a tool or and I think information 100% is it's arguably our only tool. It's manifest in a bunch of different ways, but so if the way in which you are handing information to your players, if you aren't if you're not being conscious of why you're handing some information truly privately, other information publicly, I guess I would be urging DMs out there to apply a little bit of thought to that.
Yeah.
Because again, just like we said, I think there are absolutely times where you're going to reap the rewards of providing private information to the entire table.
Yep.
There's absolutely times you and your players are going to reap the rewards of asking people to step away, passing a note, whispering information, whatever it is. There's so many different ways of doing it, and to just go like, well, it's just happens. Like however it happens, it happens. Just be thinking about it as one of the many tools at your disposal. So I don't think I have any more than that. I'm really glad we hit on this topic. I'll be really curious to hear what everyone at home has to say, because I really think this topic is as unique as the DMs and players that make up every
I think this
individual
is really
table.
Is a table to table. You're going to come up with different things.
So for all the DMs out there, I would love to hear what is your thought process. Do you have a blanket, a blanket rule for how you deliver information, or is it a case by case? Are there judgment calls? And I guess simultaneously for players is I'd love to hear from players. Kind of the same question I posed to you is like, what do you want? Like, do you want information that is private to you to be kept private? Do you like when it's an opportunity for other players to be present for that?
Yeah, I'd be very curious to hear that as well.
So I think that's pretty much all I got. You got anything else?
Nope. I think we got this one all wrapped up in a bow.
Okay. This one right here, I think is going to be pretty easy. Okay.
Okay. What do you got?
I don't want any of them at home knowing this. Okay. The world is theirs.